In 1918, Germany surrendered without a single enemy soldier on its soil. Its army still occupied large parts of France and Belgium. This bizarre situation allowed military leaders like Hindenburg and Ludendorff to spread the infamous stab-in-the-back myth. The army had not been defeated on the battlefield, but betrayed from within by revolutionaries, socialists, communists, and above all Jews. The reality was far grimmer. Troops were exhausted, desertions and mutinies were spreading, and the home front was collapsing. The 1918 November Revolution forced Kaiser Wilhelm II to abdicate, ending the German Empire and creating the fragile Weimar Republic. Economic disaster followed. The Versailles Treaty imposed crushing reparations, territorial losses, 13% of land, 10% of population, and military restrictions. Hyperinflation peaked in 1923. Money became worthless, people wheeled barrows of cash to buy bread, and theft convictions skyrocketed to over 365,000. In this atmosphere of humiliation, hunger, and chaos, National Socialism took root. It combined extreme biological racism, conspiracy theories blaming Jews for both capitalism and communism, and a new style of emotional mass politics. Street-fighting paramilitary groups like the Free Corps offered order amid violence, while folkish circles provided pseudoscientific racial theories. Agitators like Adolf Hitler and Rudolf Hess began turning widespread resentment into an organized, fanatical movement. In September 1919, Army Corporal Adolf Hitler was sent to monitor a tiny nationalist group in Munich, the German Workers' Party. His fiery, emotional speeches quickly made him its dominant figure. In 1920, he renamed it the National Socialist German Workers' Party, NSDAP, and designed its red-black swastika flag. The word socialist was deliberate to attract disillusioned workers, but meant nothing like Marxism. Hitler despised class struggle as a Jewish invention that divided the nation. For him, society was a racial community united by blood. The true struggle was between races, not classes. Marxism was a mortal enemy. Inspired by Benito Mussolini's 1922 March on Rome, Hitler attempted his own beer hall putsch in November 1923. It failed disastrously. He was arrested and sentenced to prison, where he dictated Mein Kampf, outlining his worldview, Lebensraum, living space, in the East, absolute anti-Semitism, and the Führer principle. Released early, Hitler rebuilt the party stronger. He crushed internal rivals like the Strasser brothers, who wanted genuine anti-capitalist policies. By the late 1920s, the NSDAP was a disciplined machine centered on Hitler's personal authority, with anti-Semitism and racial purity as unquestionable core doctrines. The 1929 Wall Street crash devastated Germany more than any other country. American loans dried up, factories closed, and unemployment soared to 6 million, 1 in 3 workers jobless. Middle-class savings vanished, farmers faced ruin, and street violence between Nazis and communists became daily. The Weimar Republic's fragile coalitions collapsed. People lost faith in democracy, seeing only weakness and chaos. The Nazis exploded in popularity, from 2.6% of the vote in 1928 to 37.3% in July 1932, becoming the largest party. They promised national revival, jobs, order, and revenge against Versailles, while terrifying the middle and upper classes with the specter of communist revolution. Crucially, big industrialists like Fritz Thyssen, Emil Kerdorf, and later IG Farben executives began supporting Hitler, not because they loved Nazism, but because they feared communism more. Hitler reassured them privately. Private property would be safe. Conservative elites around President Hindenburg believed they could control Hitler. Through intrigues involving Franz von Papen and Kurt von Schleicher, Hitler was appointed chancellor on January 30, 1933. They thought he would be a useful tool. They were tragically wrong. Within weeks, the Reichstag burned. Blaming communists, Hitler pushed through emergency decrees suspending civil liberties. Opposition parties, unions, and press were systematically crushed. By July 1933, Germany was a one-party state. The Nazi economy was not socialist. It was state-directed capitalism aimed at rearmament. Jalmarschaft slashed unemployment through massive public works, Autobahn, railways, and clever financing tricks like Mefo bills. Big companies, Krupp, Siemens, IG Farben, profited enormously from military contracts while keeping private ownership. Society was rebuilt around racial ideology. The Strength Through Joy program gave workers cheap vacations and entertainment, but only to control leisure time and build loyalty. Women were pushed back to Kinder, Kush, Kirche, children, kitchen, church, with marriage loans and motherhood medals for Aryan families. Terror was everywhere. The Gestapo relied on millions of citizen denunciations. The SS under Himmler grew into a state within the state, running early concentration camps. Dachau opened in 1933. The 1935 Nuremberg laws stripped Jews of citizenship and rights. Forced sterilization affected hundreds of thousands. The secret T4 program murdered 70,000 disabled Germans as life unworthy of life. All independent institutions, churches, youth groups, universities were brought under Nazi control or destroyed. Hitler's foreign policy succeeded brilliantly at first. Remilitarization, Anschluss with Austria, Munich Agreement, then Blitzkrieg, Poland crushed in weeks, 1939, France fallen in 6 weeks, 1940, Europe lay under German domination. But the June 1941 invasion of the Soviet Union, driven by racial hatred and Lebensraum dreams, became catastrophe. Millions died in the brutal Eastern War. Here Nazi racial ideology became industrial genocide. Mobile killing squads, Einsatzgruppen, shot over 1 million Jews and others. Ghettos starved hundreds of thousands. From 1942, the final solution shifted to death factories, Treblinka, Sobibor, Auschwitz-Birkenau. Gas chambers and crematoria murdered millions with assembly line efficiency. German industry was deeply complicit. Companies built camps, used slave labor, millions worked to death, and profited directly. The Holocaust killed 6 million Jews, 2/3 of European Jewry, plus millions of Roma, Slavs, disabled, homosexuals, and political opponents. The tide turned at Stalingrad, 1943, and Normandy, 1944. By 1945, Germany was crushed between Soviet and Western armies. Berlin fell after savage street fighting. Hitler committed suicide in his bunker on April 30, 1945. Germany surrendered unconditionally on May 8. When Allied troops liberated the camps, the world saw the full horror: mountains of corpses, gas chambers, warehouses of stolen possessions. Part 6. The biggest myth: was Hitler really a socialist? A detailed examination. One of the most persistent and misleading claims in modern political debates is that Adolf Hitler and the Nazi regime were socialists. This idea usually hinges on a single superficial fact. The official name of the party was the National Socialist German Workers' Party, NSDAP. The word socialist in the title is taken out of context and presented as proof. In reality, this was deliberate propaganda, not a reflection of actual ideology or policy. Hitler himself was crystal clear on this point. In numerous speeches and writings, he repeatedly attacked Marxism and genuine socialism as mortal enemies of the German nation. He described class struggle as a Jewish invention designed to divide and weaken the racial community. For Hitler, the only meaningful struggle was the racial one: Aryans against Jews, Germans against supposedly inferior races. Economic classes were irrelevant. What mattered was blood and soil. When the Nazis seized power in 1933, their actions immediately proved where they stood economically and politically. Independent trade unions were among the first institutions destroyed. On May 2, 1933, just months after Hitler became Chancellor, SA and SS stormtroopers raided union offices across Germany. Union leaders were arrested, beaten, or sent to the newly opened Dachau concentration camp. All free unions were dissolved and replaced by the German Labor Front, DF, a state-controlled organization led by Robert Ley. Strikes were forbidden, collective bargaining eliminated, and workers lost any real voice. The DF existed not to empower workers but to discipline them and tie them to the regime's goals. Private property and big business were not only protected but actively enriched. Major industrialists who had supported Hitler, such as Fritz Thyssen, Emil Kurdorf, and the heads of Krupp, IG Farben, and Siemens, saw their companies flourish under massive state rearmament contracts. The regime poured billions into military production, and profits soared. Far from nationalizing industry, the Nazis carried out selective privatizations in some sectors and built a close partnership with private capitalists. The economy was directed by the state toward war and racial objectives, but ownership remained firmly in private hands. Left-wing opponents were systematically exterminated. Communists, social democrats, and trade unionists filled the early concentration camps. The Night of the Long Knives in 1934 even eliminated the few remaining voices inside the Nazi Party, like the Strasser brothers, who had once pushed for a more anti-capitalist line. Gregor Strasser was murdered on Hitler's direct orders. Any hint of genuine socialist or worker empowerment ideas was crushed. Social programs like Strength Through Joy, KDF, or the Autobahn projects are sometimes cited as socialist achievements. In truth, they served propaganda and military purposes. KDF offered workers subsidized vacations and entertainment not to improve their lives in a liberating sense, but to monitor them, instill loyalty, and present an image of a caring regime. The Autobahn was primarily a strategic military project disguised as job creation. The core of Nazi ideology was never class equality, wealth redistribution, or workers' control of production. It was biological racism and ultranationalism. The state existed to protect and expand the so-called Aryan race, to conquer Lebensraum in the East, and to eliminate racial enemies, above all Jews. Everything else, including the economy, was subordinated to that goal. Virtually every reputable historian, left, right, or center, classifies Nazism as a far-right, totalitarian movement. It shared key traits with fascism, extreme nationalism, cult of the leader, militarism, hierarchy, contempt for democracy and individual rights, and a vision of society as an organic racial body rather than a collection of classes or free citizens. The modern revival of the Nazis or socialist claim is almost always politically motivated. It attempts to associate contemporary left-wing or social democratic ideas with one of history's most murderous regimes by exploiting the party name alone while deliberately ignoring the overwhelming historical evidence. Nazi hatred of Marxism, destruction of the labor movement, alliance with big capital, and obsession with race over class. Understanding this distinction matters profoundly. It prevents the distortion of history for short-term political gain. More importantly, it helps us recognize the real warning signs Nazism offers for today. The rise of charismatic authoritarians who promise national rebirth, the use of propaganda to replace truth, the scapegoating of minorities, the gradual erosion of democratic institutions, and the dangerous fusion of extreme nationalism with racial or ethnic hatred. Nazism was not a failed experiment in socialism. It was a uniquely destructive form of far-right totalitarianism rooted in racial supremacy. Remembering it accurately is our best defense against anything similar ever rising again.